The iron beast of the Union Pacific wheezed to a stop at Mercy's Bend Station, its black smoke dissipating into the gray November sky. Snow had begun to fall in earnest, dusting the ramshackle buildings of the Wyoming frontier town with a deceptive prettiness that couldn't hide the harshness beneath. Eveline Moore stepped down from the train car, her worn brown traveling dress inadequate against the biting wind. She clutched a small wooden valise that contained everything she owned in this world. Her fingers, already numb from the cold, fumbled with a letter she'd read 100 times during the journey from Ohio. Abel Jones had written with a steady hand, promising her a good life, a proper home, children, perhaps. She'd memorized every word, every promise of a future far from the mills and factories where women like her worked their fingers raw for pennies. But Abel Jones was dead. She learned this not from a sympathetic station master or a kindly townsperson, but from the jeering laughter that erupted from the saloon across the muddy street when she asked after him. Abel Jones! A man in a stained leather vest slapped his knee. That fool's been feeding the worms for 3 weeks now. Cave-in at the Prosperity Mine took him and 2 others. But I was to be his bride, Eveline said, her voice barely audible above the wind. This declaration brought fresh peals of laughter. Men spilled out of the saloon to gawk at her. This curiosity, this woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a corpse. Looks like you're a bride without a groom, Missy, another man called out, his breath reeking of whiskey even from several feet away. Though I'm sure we could find you some work here in town. His meaning was clear from his leer and the way the other men chuckled. Eveline's cheeks burned despite the cold. She turned away from their mockery and walked toward the only lodging house she could see, a 2-story building with Mrs. Donnelly's rooms painted in fading letters above the door. The proprietress, a severe woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a punishing bun, looked Eveline up and down with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to spot trouble. I need a room, Eveline said, setting down her valise. Just until I can sort things out. You're the mail-order bride. Mrs., Donnelly stated. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in a town of 300 souls. For Abel Jones. Yes, but can't help you. This is a respectable establishment. I don't take in strays or women of questionable circumstances. The door began to close. Please, I have money for a few nights. Not my problem. Should have made sure your man was alive before you came all this way. The door shut with finality. Eveline stood on the porch, snow gathering on her shoulders and uncovered head. Her bonnet had blown off somewhere between the station and here, and she hadn't bothered to chase it through the mud. What was the point of maintaining propriety when she'd already become the town's laughingstock? She tried the hotel next, a grander name for what was essentially a larger boarding house, but received the same response. Word had spread quickly. She was the mistake, the cosmic joke, the woman who'd come to marry a dead man. By the time full dark fell, Eveline had been turned away from every establishment in town. Even the church was locked, its windows dark. She found herself back at the train station, huddled on a bench under the meager shelter of the platform overhang. The station master had long since gone home, leaving her alone with her valise and her rapidly diminishing hope. The snow fell harder now, driven sideways by the wind. Her dress was soaked through, her thin coat useless against the Wyoming winter. She'd sold her warm cloak back in Ohio to help pay for the train ticket. It had seemed like a reasonable sacrifice for a new life. Now, as her teeth chattered and her body shook, she wondered if she would freeze to death here, becoming as much a ghost as the man she'd come to marry. From somewhere in the swirling white, she heard horses and wagon wheels. A man's voice, low and steady, carried on the wind. Jamie, keep that blanket tucked tight, a child's voice responded, high and sweet. Yes, Pa. The wagon materialized from the storm like something from a fairy tale. The driver pulled up near the platform, perhaps to check for any last freight from the evening train. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a week's worth of dark beard and eyes that seemed black in the lamplight from the station window. He noticed her immediately. How could he not? She was the only soul foolish enough to be out in this weather. Ma'am. He touched the brim of his hat. His voice held neither mockery nor pity, just acknowledgement. "Sir," she managed through chattering teeth. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her soaked dress, her small valise, the absence of anywhere else for her to go. She saw the moment understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're the woman who came for Abel Jones." She nodded, too cold and tired to feel fresh shame. The man, Eli Warden, though she didn't know his name yet, sat silent on his wagon seat. Beside him, a small boy peered out from under a heavy blanket, curious about this strange woman. "Pa?" the boy whispered. Eli seemed to come to a decision. He wrapped the reins around the brake handle and climbed down from the wagon. "Can't leave you here to freeze," he said matter-of-factly. "Got a ranch about 3 miles out. You can shelter there tonight." Eveline wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity or propriety, but her body betrayed her. She could no longer feel her feet, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Thank you," she whispered. He loaded her valise into the wagon bed, then helped her up onto the seat. His hands were gentle despite their size, careful of her obvious fragility. The boy scooted over to make room, sharing his blanket without being asked. "I'm Jamie," the child announced. "Are you sick?" "Just cold," Eveline managed. "Pa says the cold can kill you quick as a rattlesnake out here," Jamie informed her solemnly. "That's why we got to take care of each other." Eli climbed back up and took the reins. "That's right, son." He glanced at Eveline. "Name's Eli Warden. This is my boy, Jamie." "Eveline Moore," she replied, though he probably already knew from town gossip. The ride to the ranch was silent except for the creak of wheels and harness. Eveline dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time she started to slide sideways. Once, she woke to find Eli's arm steadying her, keeping her from falling off the seat. He removed it as soon as she was stable, but the warmth lingered. The ranch house appeared through the snow like a beacon-yellow lamplight glowing in 2 windows. It wasn't grand, just a simple 2-story structure with a barn and outbuildings nearby. But it looked like salvation to Eveline's weary eyes. Inside, the house was cluttered but warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Dishes sat unwashed in the dry sink, and children's toys scattered across the floor spoke of a household without a woman's touch. It had been just Eli and Jamie for 2 years now, since Margaret died of childbed fever along with the baby that would have been Jamie's sister. Eli didn't think of that often. No point in dwelling, but something about this half-frozen woman in his kitchen brought back memories of another woman who'd needed tending. He settled Eveline in a chair by the fire and brought her coffee laced with a splash of whiskey. "To warm you up," he explained gruffly. She drank gratefully, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Jamie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching her with the frank curiosity of childhood. "You came all the way from Ohio?" the boy asked. "Yes." "That's far. Pa showed me on the map. Did you see Indians?" "Jamie," Eli warned, "let Miss Moore warm up in peace." But Eveline smiled, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. "It's all right. No Indians, but I did see buffalo. Great herds of them, running alongside the train." Jamie's eyes went wide. "Really? How many?" "Too many to count, like a brown sea moving across the grassland." As she talked with his son, Eli studied her. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, too thin, too worn by hardship, with brown hair that wanted to escape its pins and gray eyes that had seen too much. But there was something about her, a dignity that remained unbroken despite the day's humiliations. He'd known Abel Jones. Not well, but enough. The man had been a dreamer, always talking about striking it rich, about the bride he was bringing from back east, about the life he'd build. Eli had thought him a fool. What woman would come to this hard place sight unseen? But here she was, and Abel was dead, and Eli found himself responsible for her, at least for tonight. "You can have the room upstairs," he said when she'd finished her coffee. "Was my wife's sewing room. Bed small but clean." "I can't impose." "Already have." He stood, effectively ending the discussion. "I'll bring up some water for washing. Jamie, show Miss Moore the room." The boy jumped up eagerly. grabbing a lamp. "This way. Pa says it's the warmest room in the house 'cause heat rises. That's science." Eveline followed the child up narrow stairs, listening to his chatter about the ranch, his horse, the cat that lived in the barn. The room was indeed small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window now black with night. But it was warm and dry and safe, more than she'd dared hope for an hour ago. "Pa's real quiet," Jamie confided as he set the lamp on the washstand. "Since Ma died, but he's good. He saved you from the cold." "Yes," Eveline said softly. "He did." After the child left, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, for Abel Jones, whom she'd never meet, for the home she'd left behind, for the uncertain future that stretched before her, but also, perhaps, for the unexpected kindness of a silent rancher who'd seen her at her lowest and offered shelter without question or condition. Tomorrow she would have to face reality, make plans, find some way forward. But tonight, as the storm raged outside and the little room held her safe, she could rest. It wasn't the new life she'd imagined, but it was life nonetheless. And in the harsh Wyoming winter, that was no small gift. Downstairs, Eli banked the fire and checked the locks, his nightly ritual unchanged except for the awareness of the woman upstairs. He paused at the foot of the stairs, listening, but heard nothing. Good. She needed sleep. He didn't know why he'd brought her here, could have given her money for a hotel, could have taken her to the church and made her someone else's problem, but something about seeing her on that platform, proud and broken all at once, had stirred feelings he'd thought buried with Margaret. Not attraction, not yet, just recognition. One survivor seeing another. Just for tonight, he murmured to the empty room. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. The storm outside would last for days, and the cold far longer. And Eveline Moore, the mail-order bride who'd become the town's mistake, had nowhere else to go. The storm lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, Eveline woke to sunlight streaming through frost-etched windows and the sound of an axe splitting wood. She'd been at the Warden Ranch for nearly a week now. Each day, Eli finding some reason she couldn't leave yet. The roads were too bad. The town was still gossiping. She needed to build her strength. She dressed quickly in her one other dress, a faded blue calico, and went downstairs. The kitchen was its usual disaster, dishes from last night's supper still on the table, muddy boots by the door. Jamie's school books scattered everywhere. Without thinking, she began to tidy up. By the time Eli came in with an armload of wood, she had water heating for dishes and was mixing biscuit dough. He stopped in the doorway. Surprised. "You don't need to do that. I need to be useful," she said without looking at him. "I can't take your charity without giving something back." He set the wood by the stove, watching her work. Her movements were efficient, practiced. "You've done this before. Kept house for my father after my mother died, then worked in other people's kitchens when he drank away his blacksmith shop." She said it matter-of-factly, kneading the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "How old were you when your mother passed?" 12. Same age Margaret had been when she'd lost her mother. Eli pushed the thought away. "Jamie will be glad for biscuits. Boy's been living on my cooking too long." As if summoned, Jamie clattered down the stairs, still in his nightshirt. "Miss Eveline, are you making breakfast?" "Biscuits?" she confirmed, smiling at his enthusiasm. "If you wash your face and hands, they'll be ready when you're dressed." The boy ran to comply, and Eli found himself smiling too. It had been a long time since anyone had told Jamie to wash for breakfast. He usually just let the boy come to table however he was. They ate together, the 3 of them, and it felt dangerously natural. Jamie chattered about his lessons. Eli had been teaching him at home since the school was too far for daily travel in winter. Eveline listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made the boy preen with pride. "You're good with him," Eli observed later. After Jamie had gone to feed the chickens, Eveline was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up to reveal thin wrists. "I like children. Always thought I'd have my own by now." She paused, hands still in the soapy water. That's why I answered Mr. Jones's advertisement. He said he wanted a family. Abel was good at saying what people wanted to hear. She turned to look at him. You didn't like him. Didn't dislike him. Just knew him for what he was. A dreamer who couldn't see past his own wishes to the harsh truth of things. Eli poured himself more coffee. This land doesn't suffer dreamers kindly. And what am I then? I came here on nothing but dreams and promises. He studied her for a long moment. You're still here. That makes you something else. That afternoon, while Jamie practiced his letters, Evelyn ventured outside. The ranch wasn't large, maybe 300 acres of grazing land, a small herd of cattle, some horses, but it was well kept. Everything in its place despite the lack of a woman's touch inside the house. She found Eli in the barn, mending harness. He worked without acknowledging her presence, though she knew he was aware of her. She'd learned that about him already. He noticed everything, but spoke little. Could you teach me? She asked finally. He looked up. Teach you what? Whatever needs doing. I know kitchen work and washing, but if I'm to stay... She stopped, flushing. I mean, while I'm here, I should learn useful things. He considered this. Can you milk a cow? No. Then we'll start there. The cow, a placid Jersey named Buttercup, Jamie's naming, stood patiently while Eli showed Evelyn how to position the bucket, how to grip, how to pull with steady rhythm. Her first attempts produced nothing but an irritated moo from Buttercup. Relax your shoulders, Eli said, moving behind her. You're fighting her. Work with her. He reached around, his large hands covering hers on the teats, guiding her movements. Evelyn forgot to breathe. She could feel the warmth of him through his coat, smell the mixture of hay and leather and something uniquely male. When the first stream of milk hit the bucket, she was so surprised she nearly upset it. There, he said, his breath warm against her ear. Just like that. He stepped back quickly, as if realizing their proximity. Evelyn continued milking, her face hot despite the cold barn. Neither spoke until the bucket was half full. That's enough for today, he said gruffly. Don't want to overtire your hands. At supper, Jamie announced, Miss Evelyn milked Buttercup. I saw from the hayloft. Spying, were you? Eli's tone was stern, but his eyes held amusement. Not spying, just watching. Will you teach her to ride too? She could help with the cattle. That's not, Evelyn began, but Eli interrupted. If she wants to learn. Their eyes met across the table. I want to learn, she said quietly. The days fell into a pattern. Morning chores, breakfast, lessons with Jamie while Eli worked outside. Dinner at midday, afternoons learning whatever Eli could teach her, mending fence, caring for horses, even basic carpentry, evenings by the fire. Jamie reading aloud while Evelyn sewed and Eli whittled or worked on his accounts. It was during one of these evenings that Evelyn finally spoke of her past in detail. Jamie had fallen asleep on the rug, and Eli had carried him up to bed. When he returned, he found her staring into the fire, tears on her cheeks. What is it? He took his chair across from her, careful to maintain distance. I was remembering my mother. She used to sew in the evenings too, said idle hands were the devil's workshop. She laughed bitterly. Didn't save her from my father's fists. Eli said nothing, knowing she needed to speak. He wasn't always cruel, but the drink changed him. After she died, it got worse. I thought if I worked hard enough, kept the house nice enough, he'd stop, but there's no stopping a man determined to destroy himself. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. When he lost the shop, I went to work for the Hartleys. They had a big house in town, needed a kitchen maid. How old? 16, Mrs. Hartley was kind enough, but Mr. Hartley. She trailed off, her meaning clear. I stayed 2 years, until I couldn't anymore. Found work at a boarding house after that, but the stories followed me. You know how people talk. Is that why you answered Abel's advertisement? She nodded. A fresh start, somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could be respectable. Fresh tears fell. And now I'm worse off than before. At least there I had work. You have work here." She looked at him in surprise. "Room and board for help with the house and Jamie." He clarified quickly. "Nothing improper, just until you figure out your next step." "Eli, it's practical," he insisted. "I need help. You need a place, simple business arrangement." But there was nothing simple about the way her heart lifted at his words, or the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes when he said them. One afternoon, while Evelyn was teaching Jamie to make pie crust, Eli watched from the doorway. She was patient with the boy's clumsy fingers, laughing when flour ended up in his hair. Margaret had never laughed in the kitchen. Cooking had been a duty to her, not a joy. "Pa, look." Jamie held up his misshapen attempt at lattice work. "Miss Evelyn says it's rustic." "That's one word for it," Eli said dryly. But he was smiling. Evelyn's eyes danced with mirth. "Everyone starts somewhere. Even you must have had first attempts." "Can't say I've ever made a pie." "Never?" She seemed genuinely shocked. "Well then, you'd better come learn too. Jamie shouldn't be the only man in this house who can feed himself properly." Before he could protest, she had him aproned and armed with a rolling pin. Jamie giggled helplessly at the sight of his large father trying to roll out delicate pastry. "Lighter touch," Evelyn coached, moving to guide him as he had guided her with the milking. Her hands covered his on the rolling pin, showing the proper pressure. "Like this, you're not wrestling it into submission." She smelled like vanilla and flour. Her hair, despite her best efforts with pins, had escaped to curl around her face. When she looked up at him, smiling at his clumsy efforts, he felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd tied tight after Margaret's death. He stepped back. "Think I'll leave the baking to you two." But later, eating the slightly burned but delicious apple pie, he caught her eye and smiled. She ducked her head, pleased, and Jamie chattered on, oblivious to the current running between the adults. That night, after Jamie was asleep, they sat by the fire as usual, but the comfortable silence had weight to it now, awareness that hadn't been there before. "I should go to town tomorrow," Evelyn said suddenly. "Face them. Find out if there's any work to be had. The roads are still bad." "They're clear enough. You went yesterday for supplies." He had no argument for that. "I'll drive you." "No." She looked at him directly. "I need to do this alone. I can't hide here forever." The word hide stung. Is that what she thought she was doing? "This isn't hiding," he said roughly. "This is—" He stopped, not sure what to call it. "What?" she asked softly. He stood abruptly. "It's late. Morning comes early." But at the foot of the stairs, he turned back. She was still by the fire, profile lit by flames, looking lost and lovely and brave all at once. "Evelyn." She looked up. "You're not hiding. You're healing. There's a difference." He climbed the stairs before she could respond, but he heard her whispered, "Thank you, follow him up," in her narrow bed. Evelyn lay awake thinking of large hands gentle on a rolling pin, of dark eyes that saw too much, of a lonely man and boy who'd taken in a stranger and made her feel like she belonged. Tomorrow she would go to town, face the gossip and rejection she knew waited there. But tonight, in this house that was beginning to feel like home, she allowed herself to dream again, different dreams than before, quieter ones, but perhaps more real for their simplicity. Down the hall, Eli too lay wakeful. He could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the windows. Another storm coming. He told himself he was glad it would keep her from town another day or two. Just practical, he insisted to his traitorous heart. Just practical. But when he finally slept, he dreamed of vanilla and flour and a woman's laughter filling the empty corners of his house, chasing away 2 years of shadows with her light. The storm Eli had predicted never came. 3 days later, under a deceptively bright winter sun, Evelyn walked into Mercy's Bend with her head high and her mended coat brushed clean. She'd refused Eli's offer to accompany her, knowing she needed to face this alone. The general store was her first stop. She needed thread and some small necessities, legitimate reasons to be in town that had nothing to do with testing whether anyone would serve her. The bell above the door chimed her entrance. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Clayton, the storekeeper's wife, stood behind the counter with her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Morning," Evelyn said pleasantly. Moving to the fabric display, silence greeted her. Two women near the pickle barrels whispered behind their hands, not bothering to lower their voices. "That's her, the ghost bride. Living in sin with Eli Warden now? I heard. Poor man, lost his wife, and now this. Creature has got her claws in him." Evelyn's hands trembled as she selected a spool of black thread, but she kept her expression calm. She'd heard worse in Ohio. "I'll take this thread and a pound of salt, please," she told Mrs. Clayton. The woman didn't move. "We're out of salt." Evelyn looked pointedly at the full salt barrel visible behind the counter. "I see. Maybe you didn't hear me. We're out. Of everything you might want." The bell chimed again. Mavis Thornton, the pastor's wife, entered with two other women from the church auxiliary. They stopped short when they saw Evelyn. "Well," Mavis said, her voice dripping false sympathy. "If it isn't Miss Moore, still in town? I see. Mrs. Thornton?" Evelyn nodded politely. "It's such a shame about Mr. Jones, though perhaps it's God's mercy he was spared from." Mavis let her gaze travel deliberately over Evelyn's worn dress. "Disappointment?" One of her companions tittered nervously. "Mavis, really?" "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. A decent woman would have left town immediately upon learning of the misunderstanding. Instead, she's taken up residence with a widower. Drawing your own conclusions isn't gossip. It's common sense." "I work for Mr. Warden," Evelyn said quietly. "As housekeeper and help with his son. Is that what they're calling it now?" Mavis's smile was sharp as glass. "How modern. Though I suppose a woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger can't be expected to have proper sensibilities." The other women murmured agreement. Mrs. Clayton still hadn't moved to get Evelyn's items. "Mr. Warden was kind enough to offer me employment when this town offered nothing but judgment," Evelyn said, her voice stronger now. "I keep his house and teach his son. There's nothing improper about honest work." "Honest," Mavis repeated, as if tasting something foul. "My dear girl, you're living under the same roof as an unmarried man. What would your mother think?" "My mother is dead," Evelyn said flatly. "And she taught me that Christian charity meant helping those in need, not casting stones." Mavis's face flushed. "How dare you quote scripture at me? You, who've brought scandal to our community." "What scandal? Being stranded, working for wages? Or is my crime simply existing when you'd prefer I conveniently disappear?" The shop fell silent. Evelyn could feel her heart hammering, but she held Mavis's gaze steadily. "We protect our own here," Mavis said coldly. "And you are not one of us. You never will be. The sooner you accept that and move on, the better for everyone, especially for that poor man and child you've latched onto." Evelyn felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these women who fed on others' misery like vultures on carrion. "I'll get my supplies elsewhere," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "You'll find the same reception everywhere in town." Mrs. Clayton finally spoke. "We don't cater to your kind." Evelyn left without another word, the bells chime following her like mocking laughter. She tried 2 more shops with the same result. At the bakery, "Mr." Hoffman at least had the grace to look ashamed as he refused her service, but he still wouldn't sell her the bread she could see cooling in the window. She was standing on the sidewalk, fighting tears and trying to decide whether to attempt the butcher shop, when she heard her name called. Dr. Harrison, the town physician, was crossing the muddy street toward her. "Miss Moore, I heard you were staying at the Warden place." She braced for more condemnation, but his weathered face was kind. "Yes, sir, as housekeeper." "Good. That boy needs a woman's influence. Eli's done his best, but," he shrugged, I was sorry to hear about Abel Jones. I tried to warn him about the mine, but young men don't listen to old doctors. You knew him? Treated him for various injuries. Good heart, weak head. Told me all about the bride he was bringing from Ohio. Said you were educated, could read and write well. Yes, sir. Doctor. Harrison studied her thoughtfully. My wife's been poorly. Her eyes aren't what they were, and she misses her books. I don't suppose you'd consider reading to her a few afternoons a week. I could pay a fair wage. Eveline's throat tightened with gratitude. I'd be honored. Dr. Harrison. Good. Come by Tuesday after dinner. And Miss Moore? He lowered his voice. Don't let the biddies chase you off. They've got nothing better to do than pick at other folks' lives. Those of us with sense judge a person by their actions, not gossip. He tipped his hat and continued on his way, leaving Evelyn standing a little straighter. One kindness didn't erase the morning's humiliations, but it helped. She was heading back to where Eli had said he'd leave the wagon when she saw Jamie running toward her, his face streaked with tears. Miss Evelyn! She caught him as he barreled into her. Jamie, what's wrong? Where's your father? At the feed store. Some boys. He hiccuped through his tears. They said awful things. About you, about Pa. They said... Shh. She knelt in the muddy street, not caring about her dress. It doesn't matter what they said. They said you're bad, that you're making our family wrong. His small fists clenched. I hit Tommy Morrison right in the nose. Oh, Jamie. She hugged him tight, her own tears finally falling. This was what she'd brought to their lives. This innocent child fighting battles he shouldn't have to fight. What's going on here? Eli's voice made them both look up. He stood there with a sack of feed over one shoulder, taking in his crying son and Eveline kneeling in the mud. Pa! Jamie ran to him. I hit Tommy 'cause he said, I know what he said, Eli said quietly, setting down the feed. His jaw was tight, his dark eyes hard as flint. Are you hurt? Jamie shook his head. But Miss Eveline is crying. Eli looked at her then, still kneeling in the street, and something in his expression shifted. He held out his hand to help her up. When she took it, he didn't immediately let go. Come on, we're going home. The ride back to the ranch was silent except for Jamie's sniffles. Eli drove with controlled precision, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the white knuckles on the reins. Once home, Jamie ran to his room. Evelyn started to follow, but Eli caught her arm. What happened in town before Jamie found you? She told him about the shops, about Mavis Thornton, about being refused service everywhere. His face darkened with each word. I should have gone with you. No, that would have made it worse. They already think... She stopped. I know what they think. He released her arm but didn't step back. Evelyn, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have known bringing you here would cause talk. You saved my life, she said firmly. I won't have you apologizing for basic human decency. Is that what you think this is? Decency? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Pa. Jamie appeared in the doorway, his face blotchy but calmer. Are we gonna have to leave town, like the Hendersons did when everyone got mad at them? Eli's expression hardened. No, son, this is our home. We don't run from small-minded people. But they're mean to Miss Eveline. Then we'll just have to show them they're wrong, won't we? Eveline said, forcing lightness into her tone. Starting with getting you cleaned up. Fighting isn't the answer, even when people say hurtful things. Later, after supper and Jamie's bedtime, Eli found Eveline crying silently by the kitchen window. Without a word, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and set one before her. This isn't what you deserve, he said roughly. You should be planning a wedding, setting up house with a good man, not fighting for scraps of respect from hypocrites. She took a sip of whiskey, letting it burn. Plans change. Mine have been changing since I was 12 years old. You could go somewhere else, start fresh. I'd give you the money. Is that what you want, for me to leave? She looked at him directly, and he saw his answer in his eyes before he spoke it. No. The word fell between them like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward, changing everything. Then I'll stay, she said simply, and they'll just have to get used to it. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They sat that way for a long moment, hands touching, the kitchen warm around them while outside the winter wind howled. Finally, Eli pulled back, standing abruptly. I need to check the stock, but before he left, he paused at the door. Evelyn, thank you for being kind to Jamie today, for letting him defend you even though it must have hurt to see. He's a good boy, she said softly, like his father. Eli left quickly then, as if the words were too much to bear, but Evelyn saw the small smile that touched his lips, and it warmed her more than the whiskey ever could. That night, she wrote a letter to the only friend she'd left in Ohio. The town has rejected me, as I knew they would, but I've found something here I didn't expect, a purpose, a place where I'm needed. The man who hired me is decent and kind, though he guards his heart like a fortress. His son is bright and loving. They've become dear to me in ways I didn't anticipate. I know there will be more difficulties ahead. The townspeople won't easily forgive what they see as my transgression. But I'm stronger than they know, than I knew. I came here to be Abel Jones's bride. Instead, I'm becoming myself. Perhaps that's the better bargain after all. She sealed the letter, knowing she might never send it, but writing it had helped clarify her thoughts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new snubs and slights to endure. But tonight, in this house where she was valued and protected, she could rest, somewhere in the barn. Eli was probably still checking stock that didn't need checking, wrestling with feelings he'd thought buried. And upstairs, Jamie slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of defending those he loved. They were an unlikely family, brought together by tragedy and circumstance. But maybe, Evelyn thought as she banked the fire for the night, the best families were the ones you chose, not the ones you were born to. And she was choosing them, no matter what the town thought. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, all was warm and safe. Tomorrow could bring its troubles. Tonight, she was home. The weeks that followed brought a tentative peace to the Warden Ranch. True to his word, Dr. Harrison hired Evelyn to read to his wife 3 afternoons a week. Mrs. Harrison, a gentle soul whose sight was failing, welcomed Evelyn warmly, seemingly oblivious to or uncaring of the town's gossip. At the ranch, a new rhythm established itself. Evelyn rose before dawn to start breakfast and pack Eli's lunch for his long days working the range. Jamie helped with morning chores before his lessons, chattering constantly about everything from the habits of chickens to his dreams of one day raising horses like his PA. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that everything shifted. Evelyn was teaching Jamie arithmetic at the kitchen table while bread rose on the counter. Eli had been out since daybreak checking the cattle in the far pasture. The late February sun streamed through the windows, deceptively warm despite the snow still blanketing the ground. If Pa has 15 head of cattle and buys 7 more at market, how many? Evelyn stopped mid-sentence, her hand going to her stomach. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Miss Evelyn? Jamie's voice seemed to come from far away. She gripped the edge of the table, waiting for the spell to pass. She'd been feeling poorly for days, but had attributed it to the stress of their last trip to town. This was different, more intense. I'm all right, she managed, but her face must have shown otherwise because Jamie jumped up, knocking over his slate. I'll get Pa. Before she could stop him, he was out the door, running toward the barn. Evelyn made it to the sink just in time to be violently ill. When the spasms passed, she splashed cold water on her face with shaking hands. No, it couldn't be. She'd been careful, had resisted, but her mind flew back to that night 3 weeks ago, when a nightmare had sent her wandering downstairs, and she'd found Eli sitting by the dying fire, unable to sleep himself. They'd talked quietly about inconsequential things, the price of feed, Jamie's progress with reading, the early thaw everyone predicted. But then their eyes had met, and something electric had passed between them. When he stood to go, she'd risen too, and suddenly they were standing so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Evelyn," he'd said, her name a question and a plea. She'd answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. Just once. Softly. Barely a touch. But it had been like setting spark to tinder. His arms had come around her, pulling her against him, and the kiss had deepened into something desperate and hungry. They'd pulled apart, breathing hard, staring at each other in shock. "We can't," he'd said roughly. "You're under my protection. It wouldn't be right." "No," she'd agreed. It wouldn't. But neither had moved away. The fire crackled. The wind rattled the windows, and then, as if pulled by invisible strings, they'd come together again. What followed had been not what she'd expected. Not the rough fumbling she'd feared from her experiences with her father's drunken friends who'd tried to corner her, nor the clinical duty she'd imagined marriage might bring. Instead, Eli had been gentle, almost reverent, as if she were something precious that might break. Afterward, they'd lain on the rug before the fire, wrapped in the quilt from the back of his chair. She'd traced the scar on his shoulder from a long-ago riding accident while he played with her unbound hair. "This changes everything," he'd said quietly. "Yes, I should marry you. Because you compromised me?" He'd turned to look at her then, his dark eyes serious. "Because I want to wake up next to you every morning. Because Jamie loves you. Because this house feels alive again with you in it." "But not because you love me," she'd said, not accusingly, just stating fact. He'd been quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know if I can love again. Evelyn." "Margaret took that part of me when she died. But what I feel for you, it's something real." She'd kissed him then, soft and sad. "Something isn't enough, Eli, not for either of us." They'd dressed in awkward silence, and by unspoken agreement, hadn't been alone together since. But now, the door burst open. Eli filled the door frame, Jamie hovering anxiously behind him. "What's wrong? Jamie said you were ill." "I'm fine, just a moment of dizziness." But even as she said it, another wave hit, and she gripped the counter. Eli crossed to her in 2 strides, his hand going to her forehead. "You're clammy. How long have you been feeling sick?" "A few days. It's nothing." "It's not nothing." His voice was gruff with concern. "Jamie, ride to town and fetch Doc Harrison." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. Both males looked at her in surprise. "I mean, there's no need to trouble him. I just need to rest." Eli's eyes narrowed. Studying her face, she saw the moment understanding dawned. His hand dropped from her forehead as if burned. "Jamie," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "go finish your chores." "But go." The boy left reluctantly, casting worried glances over his shoulder. When they were alone, Eli stepped back, putting the table between them. "How long have you known?" "I don't know anything," she said desperately. "It could be anything. The grip, something I ate." "Evelyn." She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I've suspected for a week, but I've been wrong before. Back in Ohio, sometimes these things just—" "We were careful," he said, almost to himself. "That night, I was careful. Careful isn't always enough." They sat in silence, the reality settling over them like snow. Finally, Eli spoke. "I'll post the banns tomorrow. We can be married by week's end." "No." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean, no?" "I won't trap you into marriage." "Eli, you said yourself you can't love again. I won't doom us both to a union built on obligation." "This isn't about obligation," he said harshly. "There's a child to consider now." "If there's a child. We don't know." "Stop." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "We both know. Evelyn. And even if we didn't, it doesn't matter. That night changed things between us. The whole town already thinks we should have married weeks ago. The town thinks a lot of things that aren't true. This time they'd be right. He turned to face her. I won't have my child born without my name. I won't have you shamed more than you already have been. Your child, she repeated softly. Is that what this is about? Possession? Property rights? You know that's not. He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. What do you want from me, Evelyn? Pretty words, promises I can't keep. I'm offering you my name, my home, my protection, but not your heart. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Eli's jaw worked as if he were chewing on his response. My heart died with Margaret, he said finally. But what's left, it's yours, if you want it. It was honest, at least brutal in its frankness, but real. Evelyn stood on shaking legs. I need time to think. Time. Evelyn, if you're with child, time is the one thing we don't have. Every day we wait is another day for gossip to spread, another day for... She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Please, Eli, just give me today. Tomorrow we can plan, make decisions, but today, I need to think. He caught her hand, held it against his mouth for a moment. His eyes were dark with emotions she couldn't name. Tomorrow, then, he agreed roughly. That evening, Evelyn barely touched her supper. Jamie watched her with worried eyes, unusually quiet. Eli maintained a facade of normalcy, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. After Jamie's bedtime story, a chapter from Robinson Crusoe that none of them really heard, Evelyn retreated to her room, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind churned with possibilities, fears, hopes she didn't dare name. Near midnight, she heard Eli's door open, his footsteps on the stairs. She rose and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, following quietly. She found him in the barn, brushing down his horse by lamplight. Couldn't sleep either? She asked softly. He didn't turn. Duchess threw a shoe today. Meant to tend to it earlier. They both knew it was an excuse. She moved closer, breathing in the familiar sense of hay and horse and leather. I've been thinking, she began. And? I'll marry you, but I have conditions. Now he did turn, wariness in his eyes. What conditions? First, we tell Jamie the truth, or as much of it as he needs to know. That we care for each other. That we want to be a real family. No lies between us and him. Agreed. What else? Second, we share a bed. His eyebrows rose, and she blushed, but continued firmly. I won't have a marriage in name only. Eli, if we do this, we do it properly, as husband and wife in all ways. That won't be a hardship, he said roughly. And third, she took a breath. We really try to build something good between us. Maybe you can't love me the way you loved Margaret. Maybe I can't fill that place in your heart, but we can try to make a new place, can't we? For us, for Jamie, for... Her hand drifted to her stomach. Eli set down the curry comb and crossed to her. His hands framed her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. You deserve better than a broken man, Evelyn Moore. Maybe, she agreed. But you're the man I want. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she tasted promise in it, not of perfect love or fairy tale happiness, but of commitment, partnership, the possibility of joy carved out of sorrow. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll post the banns tomorrow. Weather permitting, we can marry next Sunday. The town will talk. Let them. I'm done caring what narrow-minded fools think. His hand drifted to her still flat belly. This is what matters. You, Jamie, our family. Our family. She repeated, testing the words. They felt right, solid, real. Come back to the house, he said. It's cold, and you need your rest. They walked together through the starlit yard, not touching but aware of each other with every step. At her bedroom door, Eli paused. Evelyn, that night, I was careful because I didn't want to trap you. Not because I didn't want this. He gestured between them. I need you to know that. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. I know. Good night, Eli. Good night, future Mrs. Warden. The title sent a thrill through her. In a week's time, she'd be his wife. Not the mail-order bride of a dead man, not the fallen woman the town whispered about, but Eli Warden's wife, Jamie's mother, a rancher's partner with a place and a purpose and a growing life inside her that would seal their bond forever. It wasn't the romance she'd dreamed of as a young girl, but as she settled into bed, hand resting protectively over her belly, Eveline thought it might be something better, a love built on choice rather than chance, on commitment rather than passion alone. Though there was passion too, she thought, remembering that night by the fire. Yes, there was definitely that. Tomorrow would bring challenges, telling Jamie, facing the town's renewed gossip, planning a wedding with no friends to stand witness, but tonight she was choosing hope, choosing love, even if it came disguised as duty, choosing the broken man who'd saved her and the little boy who called her Miss Evelyn with such trust in his voice. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the muddy yard in fresh white. A new beginning, Eveline thought drowsily. For all of them. The morning they went to post the banns. The town's reaction was worse than either had anticipated. Pastor Thornton, Mavis's husband, refused outright. I cannot in good conscience announce a union that began in sin, he said, his thin face pinched with disapproval. The whole town knows she's been living in your house, Warden, unmarried. It's a scandal. Then marry us quietly, Eli said, his voice dangerously low. No bans, no announcement, just make it legal. The law requires a justice of the peace, not a minister. Eli interrupted. If you won't do your Christian duty, I'll find someone who will. They left the parsonage to find a small crowd gathered outside, drawn by raised voices. Mavis Thornton stood at the front, her face triumphant. Turned away from God's house, she announced to the gathering. As I said they would be, no decent minister would sanctify such a union. Move aside, Eli growled. But Mavis stepped directly into their path. That woman has bewitched you, Eli Warden. Your poor Margaret must be rolling in her grave. Eveline felt Eli go rigid beside her. His hand, which had been supporting her elbow, clenched into a fist. Don't, she whispered. She's not worth it. But Mavis wasn't finished. What kind of example are you setting for that innocent boy? Bringing a woman of loose morals into his dead mother's home? Enough. Eli's voice cut like a whip. Eveline has more decency in her smallest finger than you have in your entire body. Mavis, she took on the care of a grieving boy in a household that needed tending, asking nothing in return but fair wages and respect. Respect, someone in the crowd scoffed. For a woman who came to marry a stranger and took up with another before the first was cold in the ground? Eveline lifted her chin. I came here in good faith to start a new life, when circumstances changed. Mr. Warden offered me honest work, that we've come to care for each other. Care for each other, Mavis mocked. Is that what you call it? We have other words for women like you. The crowd murmured agreement. Eveline saw familiar faces twisted with judgment, the baker who wouldn't sell her bread, the women who crossed the street to avoid her, the men who leered when their wives weren't looking. You want to know what kind of woman I am? Eveline stepped forward, her voice carrying clear and strong. I'm the kind who's worked since I was 12 years old, who nursed my mother through her final illness and endured my father's fists when drink took hold of him, who scraped and saved for 2 years to buy passage here, believing in a promise of a better life. The crowd had quieted, but she wasn't done. I'm the kind of woman who teaches a motherless boy his letters and mends his clothes and holds him when nightmares come, who rises before dawn to keep house and works until past dark to earn her keep. And yes, I'm the kind of woman who dares to love a good man, even when the whole town stands against us. Love, Mavis spat. You don't know the meaning. That's enough. The voice came from behind the crowd. Doctor, Harrison pushed through, his wife on his arm despite her poor vision. "Doctor, Harrison?" Mavis simpered. "Surely you don't approve." "I approve of folks minding their own business," he said curtly. "And I approve of a woman who reads to my wife 3 times a week, refusing payment half the time because she says the company is payment enough." "Mrs." Harrison spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "I approve of a young woman who brings light back into a house that's been dark too long, who makes a little boy laugh again." "You don't know what she is," someone protested. "I know exactly what she is." "Mrs." Harrison said. "She's kind. The rest is gossip and spite." An old rancher named Samuel Crawford stepped out of the crowd. "I'll stand witness, warden, if you need one. Your Margaret was my wife's cousin. She'd want you happy." One by one, a few others separated themselves from the mob. Not many, but enough. The owner of the livery stable, 2 ranch hands who'd worked with Eli, an elderly widow who lived at the edge of town. "Judge Morrison can perform the ceremony," Crawford said. "He's not particular about the gossip of hypocrites." Mavis's face flushed ugly red. "You'll regret this, all of you who stand with them. When God's judgment comes, God's judgment isn't yours to dispense." "Mrs." Harrison said quietly. "Thank the Lord for that, or we'd all be damned." The confrontation ended with the crowd dispersing, muttering. But Eveline had seen something that gave her hope. Not everyone in Mercy's Bend was against them. It was a small victory, but she'd take it that evening, as she prepared supper. Eli was unusually quiet. Jamie had been told they were to be married and had whooped with joy, immediately asking if he could call her Ma now. She'd hugged him tight and said yes, blinking back tears. Now the boy was in the barn doing chores, leaving the adults alone. "You were fierce today," Eli said suddenly, "like a wildcat protecting her den." "I was protecting us," she said simply. "Our family." He crossed to her, turned her from the stove to face him. "I should have spoken sooner, should have defended you better. You defended me fine." "No." His hands framed her face. "I let you bear the weight of their judgment alone for too long. I told myself it was to protect you, but maybe I was protecting myself too. From feeling again. From risking again. And now I realize the risk isn't in loving you. It's in losing you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "When Mavis said Margaret would be ashamed, I wanted to tell her the truth, that Margaret would have liked you, would have been grateful to you for bringing life back to this house. You don't have to say that. Yes, I do, because I need you to understand something. Eveline, I'm not marrying you just because of the baby, or because it's proper, or to quiet the gossips. I'm marrying you because I can't imagine this house without you in it, can't imagine Jamie without your love, or myself without—" He paused, struggling. "Without your light." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Eli, I may not say the pretty words you deserve. I may be too broken to love the way I should, but what I feel for you is real and true and growing stronger every day. That's what I should have said to that crowd today." She rose on her toes and kissed him, tasting salt and promise. "When they broke apart," she whispered, "those are the prettiest words I've ever heard." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady. 3 more days, he murmured into her hair. 3 more days. But they wouldn't have 3 days of peace. The next morning, Eveline woke to find a letter slipped under the front door. Her name was scrawled across it in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, the message was brief and vicious. "Leave town before Sunday or face the consequences. We don't need your kind corrupting our community. This is your only warning." She showed it to Eli, who went very still as he read. "Pack your things," he said. Her heart dropped. "You want me to leave?" "What? No." He looked at her in surprise. "We're all leaving. Today. We'll go to Cheyenne. Get married there. Stay until this blows over. Eli, we can't just run. This isn't running. This is keeping you and Jamie safe." He crumpled the letter. "I know these people. Eveline. Most are just talk, but some—" Some might act on threats like this, as if to underscore his words. They heard Jamie shout from outside. They rushed out to find him standing by the chicken coop, staring in horror. Someone had killed all their chickens in the night, leaving the bodies arranged in a grotesque display. Who would do this? Jamie asked, tears streaming. They were just chickens. They never hurt anybody. Evelyn gathered him close while Eli surveyed the damage, his face carved from stone. Get inside, he said quietly. Both of you. Eli, inside, now. They obeyed, watching from the window as he dealt with the carnage. When he came back in, his expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen. We leave within the hour. Pack only what we need. Papa, are we coming back? Jamie asked in a small voice. Eli knelt before his son. This is our home. Jamie, no one will drive us from it. But sometimes the smart thing is to step away from a fight until the other fellow cools down. We'll go to Cheyenne. I'll marry Miss Evelyn proper. And then we'll come home. Understand? Jamie nodded solemnly. Will the bad people still be here when we get back? Maybe, but we'll face them together, as a family. They packed quickly, loading the wagon with essentials. Evelyn's few possessions fit in her same small valise. Everything else could wait. As they prepared to leave, several neighbors appeared. The Crawfords, Doctor, Harrison, and a few others. Heard you might be traveling, Crawford said carefully. Thought you could use some company on the road. Dangerous country between here and Cheyenne. Eli's throat worked. Sam, you don't have to. Man has a right to get married in peace, Crawford said firmly. We'll see you there safe. It was a small procession that left Mercy's Bend that morning, the Warden wagon flanked by friends who'd chosen loyalty over popular opinion. As they passed through town, curtains twitched and faces appeared in windows, but no one tried to stop them. Evelyn sat between Eli and Jamie, one hand holding the boy's smaller one, the other resting secretly against Eli's thigh. She was leaving nothing behind in this town that mattered. Everything she valued was in this wagon or riding alongside it. Are you afraid? Eli asked quietly as the town disappeared behind them. No, she said, and meant it. I have you and Jamie. I have our child growing inside me. I have friends willing to stand with us. What is there to fear? He covered her hand with his briefly. You really are fierce, aren't you? I'm a warden, she said, or will be soon. I'm told we don't run from fights. No, he agreed, a small smile touching his lips. We don't. The road to Cheyenne stretched ahead, muddy and uncertain, but the sun was shining. Jamie was singing a song she'd taught him, and good people rode beside them. Whatever waited in Mercy's Bend on their return, they'd face it together. 3 days later, in a simple ceremony in the judge's chambers in Cheyenne, Evelyn Moore became Evelyn Warden. Jamie stood as witness alongside the Crawfords and Doctor. Harrison. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, no church bells, but when Eli slipped his mother's plain gold ring onto her finger and promised to honor and keep her, Evelyn had never felt more beautiful. You may kiss your bride, the judge said with a smile. Eli drew her close, his kiss gentle but thorough. Mrs. Warden, he murmured against her lips. Mr. Warden, she replied, and felt him smile. Ma! Jamie threw his arms around them both. We're a real family now. Yes, Evelyn said, tears flowing freely. We are. They spent one night in Cheyenne's best hotel, Eli's wedding gift to her, in their room, with Jamie safely asleep next door at the Crawfords. They came together as husband and wife. It was different from that first desperate encounter by the fire, slower, deeper, sanctified by vows and rings and the law of God and man. I love you, Eli whispered in the darkness afterward, the words seeming surprised out of him. I didn't think I could again, but I do. Evelyn traced his face with gentle fingers. I know. I've known for a while now. How? Because you show me every day, in 1,000 small ways. That's better than pretty words. Eli, that's the kind of love that lasts. They held each other through the night, No longer two broken people seeking comfort, but a married couple facing the future together. Tomorrow they would return to Mercy's Bend, to whatever challenges awaited. But tonight, they were simply Eli and Eveline Warden, bound by love and law and the little life growing between them. The fight wasn't over. The town's judgment hadn't changed. But they had something now that no amount of gossip or threats could break: each other, and the family they'd chosen to build in defiance of all who stood against them. The letter arrived 2 months after their return to Mercy's Bend. Eveline was hanging washing on the line, her movements careful as her belly had begun to round noticeably. The spring air was sweet with the scent of new grass, and for a moment, she'd almost forgotten the troubles that still plagued them in town. A rider approached fast from the east road. Not a local. She'd learned to recognize most of the horses in the area. The man dismounted at the gate, dusty from hard travel. "Mrs. Warden?" The formality of it made her wary. "Yes? Sheriff Dalton, from Millfield County." He touched his badge. "I need to speak with you about Charles Hartley." The wash rag slipped from her numb fingers. That name, she hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over a year. "What about him?" "He's dead, ma'am. Has been for 3 months. The sheriff's weathered face was grim. "Problem is, his wife is claiming you killed him." The world tilted. Eveline gripped the washing line to stay upright. "That's impossible. I haven't been in Ohio since last November." "She's not saying you killed him recent-like. She's saying you poisoned him slow, back when you worked for them. Says he's been sick ever since you left, and the doc finally figured it was arsenic." "No." The word came out as a whisper. "No, I never. What's going on here?" Eli materialized from the barn, Jamie trailing behind. He positioned himself between Eveline and the sheriff, his hand resting on the rifle he always carried when working. "Sheriff Dalton, from Ohio," Eveline managed. "He says they think I killed Mr. Hartley." She saw Eli's jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. "My wife hasn't been to Ohio in months. Whatever happened to Hartley, she had nothing to do with it." "Maybe so," Dalton said, "but I've got a warrant." "She needs to come with me for questioning." "She's not going anywhere." Eli's voice was flat, dangerous. "Now, Mr. Warden, I understand you want to protect your wife, but the law? The law can go to hell. My wife is with child. She's not making any journey to Ohio on the word of a bitter woman." Dalton's hand moved to his gun. "I don't want trouble, but I've got a job to do." "Papa?" Jamie's voice was small, scared. Eveline stepped around Eli, though he tried to stop her. "It's all right. Sheriff, I'll answer your questions, but I won't go to Ohio. Not like this." She placed a protective hand on her belly. "Ask what you need to ask." Dalton relaxed slightly. "Fair enough. Can we talk inside?" They gathered in the kitchen, Eli sending Jamie to his room despite the boys' protests. Eveline made coffee with shaking hands while the sheriff laid out the accusations. "Mrs. Hartley says you had access to the household stores, including rat poison. Says her husband took ill right after you left their employ." "He was sick before I left," Eveline said carefully. "Stomach troubles, too much rich food and drink, or arsenic poisoning, according to the doctor who examined him before he died." Eli leaned forward. "Why would my wife poison a man and then leave town? If she wanted him dead, wouldn't she stay to finish the job?" "Unless she was running from something else," Dalton suggested, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Hartley says there was impropriety. Says her husband confessed on his deathbed that he'd been familiar with Miss Moore." Eveline's cup clattered to the table. "That's a lie." "Is it? Then why did you leave so sudden? Why come all the way out here to marry a stranger?" "Because—" Her voice broke. She felt Eli's hand cover hers. "Because Hartley forced himself on her," Eli said bluntly. And when she defended herself, she knew no one would believe a servant over a respected businessman. So she left, started fresh, arted. "There's no crime in that." Dalton studied them both. "That's a convenient story." "It's the truth," Eveline said fiercely. "Mr. Hartley cornered me in the pantry. When I fought him off, he hit his head on a shelf. He was angry, said he'd ruin me. So yes, I ran, but I didn't poison him. Can anyone verify this? Anyone who saw Hartley pursue you? The other servants knew. Mary, the cook, she warned me to be careful around him. And Thomas, the stable boy, he saw Mr. Hartley follow me into the pantry that day. Dalton wrote in his notebook. I'll need to verify these stories. Then do it, Eli said. But you'll do it from here. My wife isn't traveling anywhere. I could arrest her right now. Mr. Warden. You could try. Eli's tone was conversational, but his eyes were hard as flint. But then you'd have to explain to your superiors how a pregnant woman died resisting arrest, because that's the only way you're taking her. The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Dalton stood. I'll wire back to Ohio. See what these witnesses have to say. Until then, Mrs. Warden, don't leave the county. She won't, Eli promised. After the sheriff left, Evelyn collapsed in her chair, shaking. Eli knelt beside her, gathering her hands in his. Why didn't you tell me about Hartley attacking you? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought I'd left it all behind. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Now it's followed me here. To our home. To Jamie. Hey. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. And I won't let them take you. Eli, if there's evidence, there's no evidence of something that didn't happen. Hartley was a bastard who got what he deserved, even if it took arsenic to do it. But you didn't give it to him. How can you be so sure? Because I know you. He pressed his forehead to hers. You're fierce when protecting those you love, but you're not a killer. Evelyn, you're not capable of that kind of cold planning. A sound from the doorway made them turn. Jamie stood there, eyes wide. Ma's not going away, is she? Evelyn held out her arms, and he flew into them. No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was a promise she could keep. The next 3 days were agony. Word spread quickly through Mercy's Bend. The sheriff's visit was too noteworthy to keep quiet. The town's gossips had a field day. The mail-order bride was now a suspected murderess. Even those who'd begun to soften toward the wardens pulled back. Dr. Harrison remained steadfast, as did the Crawfords, but they were increasingly isolated voices. When Evelyn went to town for supplies, Eli refused to let her go alone. The whispers followed her like a plague of locusts. Poisoner, she heard. Black Widow. I told you she was no good. At the general store, Mrs. Clayton finally served her, but with obvious reluctance and only because Eli stood behind her like a stone guardian. We don't want trouble here, the woman said, sliding the purchases across the counter as if they might contaminate her. Maybe it would be better if you folks found somewhere else to trade. We've traded here for 5 years, Eli said quietly. That was before you brought her into it. Mrs. Clayton's gaze flicked to Evelyn. We've got to think of our safety. Who knows what she might do if cornered? Evelyn wanted to respond, to defend herself, but exhaustion weighed her down. The baby had been restless for days, as if sensing her distress. She placed a protective hand over her belly and said nothing. Outside, Mavis Thornton lay in wait with her usual coterie. The murderess shows her face, she announced loudly. Have you no shame, no decency? Leave her be, Eli warned. Or what? You'll shoot me? Mavis's smile was vicious. That would be fitting. Violence begetting violence. Though I suppose you're used to that, aren't you, Mrs. Warden? Tell me, did you poison your first victim slowly, or was it quick? Stop! The voice came from an unexpected source, Pastor Thornton himself. He looked older, grayer, as if the weight of his wife's hatred had worn him down. This has gone far enough, Mavis. How dare you? I said enough. His voice held an authority Evelyn had never heard before. Whatever this woman may or may not have done in Ohio, she is here now, with child, and deserving of Christian charity. She's a Jezebel, and Christ ate with tax collectors and sinners. The pastor looked directly at Evelyn. I cannot undo my earlier failures, Mrs. Warden, but I can offer you this if you need sanctuary. My church is open to you. Mavis gasped in outrage, but her husband had already turned away, walking back toward the parsonage with steady steps. That night, as Eveline told Eli about the encounter, he smiled grimly. Even Thornton has his limits. Apparently. It doesn't matter. If the witnesses in Ohio don't support my story, they will. How can you know that? He was quiet for a moment. Because I sent Sam Crawford to Ohio yesterday, with enough money to make sure the truth gets told. She stared at him. Eli, you can't bribe. I'm not bribing anyone, but sometimes people need encouragement to remember things clearly, to speak up when it matters. He pulled her against him. I told you, Evelyn, I won't let them take you. And if Sheriff Dalton doesn't accept their testimony, then we run California, Oregon, somewhere they can't follow. His hand splayed over her belly. I won't lose you, either of you. She wanted to protest, to say they couldn't abandon the ranch, Jamie's home, the life they'd built. But looking into his determined face, she realized he meant it. He would give up everything to keep her safe. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, more than I thought possible. He kissed her softly. Now rest. You're wearing yourself thin with worry. But rest wouldn't come. In the early hours before dawn, cramping woke her. When she stood, wetness flowed down her legs. Not the clear fluid of birth, but blood. Eli! The word tore from her throat. He was beside her instantly, taking in the situation with one glance. Get dressed. We're going to Doc Harrison's. It's too early. The baby will be fine. But his face was white with fear. He hitched the wagon in record time while she dressed with shaking hands. Jamie, wakened by the commotion, wanted to come, but Eli ordered him to stay put. Lock the doors, he told the boy. Don't let anyone in except us or the Crawfords. The ride to town was a nightmare of pain and terror. Eveline gripped Eli's hand, trying not to cry out with each spasm. By the time they reached the doctor's house, she was barely conscious. Doctor. Harrison took one look and had Eli carry her to the examination room. His wife, despite her poor vision, assisted with practiced efficiency. How far along? The doctor asked. About 4 months. Eli answered when Eveline couldn't. Too early, but not impossible. He worked quickly, his face grave. Mrs. Warden, I need you to stay as still as possible. The bleeding is concerning, but the baby still has a heartbeat. Hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Eli never left her side, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement when the contractions hit. Gradually, miraculously, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. The contractions eased. Crisis averted, for now. Doctor, Harrison said, exhaustion clear in his voice. But she needs complete bed rest. No travel, no stress, no exertion of any kind. The sheriff, Eveline began weakly. The sheriff can wait, the doctor said firmly. Your life and your child's life take precedence over legal matters. I'll write to him myself if needed. They stayed at the doctor's house that night, Eli sleeping in a chair beside her bed. When she woke, he was watching her with red-rimmed eyes. I thought I'd lost you, he said roughly. I'm tougher than I look. I know, but seeing you like that. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I can't do this without you. Evelyn, I thought I could. Thought I was strong enough to be alone again. But I'm not. You won't have to. She squeezed his hand weakly. I'm not going anywhere. Not to Ohio. Not to the grave. I'm staying right here with you and Jamie. Promise? She smiled at the echo of their son's words. I promise. A knock at the door interrupted them. Doctor, Harrison entered with a telegram. From Sheriff Dalton, he said. Thought you'd want to see it right away. Eli read it aloud. Witnesses confirmed your wife's account. Hartley known for pursuing servant girls. Wife admits knowing of his behavior. No charges will be filed. Case closed. Eveline burst into tears, relief, exhaustion, and joy overwhelming her. Eli gathered her carefully in his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe. We're all safe." But even as she clung to him, Evelina knew it wasn't quite over. The town would still gossip, still judge. There would be those who believed she'd gotten away with murder. But none of that mattered now. She had her family, her freedom, and the child still growing inside her despite all odds. "Take me home," she whispered against Eli's chest. "As soon as Doc says you can travel." "No, I mean home. To our bed, our house, our life. I'm done letting others dictate where I belong." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw her own fierce determination reflected in his eyes. "Then home it is," he agreed. "And God help anyone who tries to take it from us again." Eveline returned to Mercy's Bend on a brilliant May morning, the crisis with the baby having passed but leaving her weakened. Dr. Harrison had insisted on 3 weeks of rest at his home, during which Eli had barely left her side. Now, as their wagon rolled down the main street, she sat straighter despite her exhaustion. The town seemed different somehow, or perhaps she was different. The whispers still followed them. The stares still pricked like needles, but they seemed smaller now, less significant. She'd faced death, both legal and physical, and survived. What power did gossip hold after that? At the general store, Mrs. Clayton served them in stony silence, but she served them. At the bank, the teller nodded politely. Small victories. But Eveline would take them. Let's go home," she said to Eli after they'd loaded supplies. But as they turned toward the ranch road, they saw smoke rising in the distance. Black smoke. Too much for a chimney. "Fire," Eli said, his face going pale. He snapped the reins, urging the horses to speed. They weren't alone. Other riders and wagons were heading the same direction, toward the Hendrickson Ranch, their nearest neighbors to the east. As they drew closer, Eveline could see flames licking at the barn roof. Without hesitation, Eli pulled up and jumped down. "Stay here," he ordered, but Eveline was already climbing down after him. "You need every hand," she said firmly. "You're supposed to be resting." "I'll work the water pump. I can handle that." There was no time to argue. The scene was chaos. Men running with buckets, women corralling frightened animals, children crying. The Hendricksons were an older couple, their grown children living elsewhere. Mrs. Hendrickson stood frozen, watching her husband's prize horses still trapped in the burning barn. Eli didn't hesitate. He grabbed a wet blanket someone offered and plunged into the smoke. Other men followed, including, Eveline noticed with surprise, some who'd shunned them in town. She took her place at the pump, working the handle steadily despite the ache in her back. Other women formed a bucket line. She recognized several faces, women who'd crossed the street to avoid her, who'd whispered behind their hands. Now they worked beside her without comment, united in crisis. "Switch with me," a voice said. Eveline looked up to find Mavis Thornton beside her. "You shouldn't be doing this in your condition." Eveline was too shocked to protest as Mavis took over the pump handle. She moved to passing buckets instead. Easier work, but still necessary. The battle lasted hours. When the barn roof finally collapsed, the horses were safe. The house was saved. And only smoldering ruins remained of what had been a fine barn. Men stood around coughing, faces black with soot. Eli emerged from the smoke supporting Tom Hendrickson, who'd breathed too much and couldn't stand straight. "Get him to Doc Harrison," someone called. As the immediate danger passed, the crowd began to disperse, but not everyone left. Without discussion or apparent organization, people began to clean up. Women packed the Hendricksons' belongings that had been hastily saved from the barn. Men discussed rebuilding plans. "We'll need lumber," Sam Crawford was saying. "I can spare some beams from my place. I've got nails," another rancher offered. "Barn raising next Saturday," someone declared. "Weather permitting." Eveline found herself beside old Mrs. Hendrickson, helping wrap dishes that had been stored in the barn's loft. "Thank you, dear," the older woman said quietly. "I know you're not well. You shouldn't have come." Neighbors help neighbors, Evelyn replied simply. Mrs. Hendrickson's eyes filled with tears. I haven't been very neighborly to you, have I? None of us have. Evelyn said nothing, focusing on the dishes. My daughter, Mrs. Hendrickson continued. She was about your age when she died. Fever took her and her baby both. When I heard about you, about the baby, about the troubles, she trailed off. I was angry. Why should you have what my girl couldn't? It wasn't fair of me. Grief makes us all unfair sometimes, Evelyn said softly. The older woman patted her hand. You're a good woman. I should have seen that sooner. As the sun began to set, Eli appeared at her elbow. Time to go. You've done too much already. She didn't argue. Exhaustion pulled at her bones. As they walked to the wagon, she noticed several people nod to them. Not friendly, exactly, but acknowledging. Tom Morrison, whose son Jamie had fought, even touched his hat. The ride home was quiet. Jamie, who'd been left with the Crawfords during the fire, chattered about his day. But the adults were lost in thought. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed fighting the ache in her back, Eli sat beside her with a worried frown. You overdid it. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're pale as paper and shaking. He tucked another blanket around her. The baby is strong, like his father. She caught his hand. Or her father. Did you see how they worked with us today? Like we were just people. Crisis has a way of stripping things to essentials, he said. But it won't last. Tomorrow they'll remember why they dislike us. But he was wrong. The next morning brought a visitor, Mrs. Morrison, Tom's wife, carrying a basket. I brought some eggs and fresh bread, she said awkwardly. Thought you might be tired after yesterday. Evelyn accepted the basket with surprise. Thank you. Would you like some coffee? Yes, that would be nice. They sat at the kitchen table. Two women who'd been on opposite sides now attempting conversation. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Morrison said finally. For my boy. For what he said to yours. Children repeat what they hear, Evelyn said carefully. Yes, they do. The woman flushed. I've been teaching him wrong. My husband and I. We talked last night, seeing your man risk his life for our neighbors. Seeing you work yourself near to collapse even though they've been nothing but cruel. She shook her head. We've been fools. We all make mistakes. Some bigger than others. Mrs. Morrison met her eyes. I'd like to start over. If you're willing. Maybe our boys could play together sometimes. Tom could use a friend like Jamie, someone who stands up for what's right. Evelyn smiled. I think Jamie would like that. After Mrs. Morrison left, Evelyn told Eli about the visit. He listened with skeptical interest. One family, he said. Out of how many? It's a start. And it was. Over the following weeks, as Evelyn rested on doctor's orders, a slow thaw began. The barn raising for the Hendricksons became a community event. The wardens were specifically invited, their help welcomed. Women who'd shunned Evelyn now nodded politely. Some even spoke to her. Not everyone softened. Mavis Thornton remained cold, though she no longer actively spread poison. A few families still refused to acknowledge them, but the active hostility faded, replaced by something like acceptance. You did this, Eli told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Jamie play with Tom Morrison in the yard. Did what? Change them. Change their minds. I didn't change anything. I just lived my life. She rubbed her swelling belly. We lived our lives. Eventually, they had to see us for who we really are. Not all of them. No, not all, but enough. She leaned against his shoulder. Enough to make a life here, to raise our children without them being outcasts. Children? He raised an eyebrow. Plural? She smiled. Well, one at a time. But Jamie needs siblings. Don't you think? He turned to kiss her temple. I think Jamie needs exactly what he has. A mother who fights for him, who teaches him to be kind even when the world isn't kind back. He already had a good father teaching him that. His father was just surviving until you came along. You taught us both how to live again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the boys play. In the distance, other neighbors worked their fields. The Crawfords' wagon passed on the road, Sam waving cheerfully. It wasn't the acceptance Evelyn had dreamed of when she'd first come to Mercy's Bend as a hopeful bride. It was harder won, more complex, perhaps more fragile, but it was real. "Ma," Jamie called. "Tom says his mother invited us for Sunday dinner. Can we go?" Evelyn looked at Eli, who shrugged. "Your decision." "Yes," she called back. "We'd be honored." The boys whooped and returned to their game. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the baby move within her, feeling her husband's solid presence beside her, hearing her son's laughter in the yard. "No regrets?" Eli asked softly. "None," she said, and meant it. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The sun set over Mercy's Bend, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The baby would come soon. The ranch needed work. Relationships with neighbors remained delicate. But tonight, Evelyn Warden sat with her family on the porch of their home, finally and fully belonging, in town. Pastor Thornton prepared his sermon for Sunday, choosing verses about forgiveness and acceptance. Mrs. Morrison planned a menu that would welcome the Wardens properly. Dr. Harrison told his wife about Evelyn's bravery during the fire, how she'd worked despite her condition. The story spread, as stories do in small towns, how the mail-order bride who'd been rejected had become one of them through simple acts of courage and kindness, how the family that had been shunned had proved their worth when it mattered most. Not everyone believed in redemption, not everyone chose forgiveness, but enough did to transform a town's hostility into something approaching grace. And in the end, that was miracle enough for one small family on the Wyoming frontier, building their life one day, one neighbor, one act of kindness at a time. Spring arrived in full glory at the Warden Ranch, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the sound of newborn calves. Evelyn stood at the clothesline, her belly round and heavy beneath her apron, hanging Jamie's school clothes to dry in the warm breeze. The baby was due any day now, and every movement required careful planning. "Ma!" Jamie came running from the direction of the creek, his shoes squelching with mud. "Ma, there's a whole family of ducks, 6 babies." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." She smiled at his enthusiasm. At 8 years old now, he found magic in everything. "But those shoes need to come off before you take another step." He obediently sat on the porch steps to remove the muddy boots. "Tom says when the baby comes, I won't be special anymore. Says babies take all the attention." Evelyn lowered herself carefully beside him. "You'll always be special. Jamie, you were the boy who made me a mother first. This baby will be lucky to have you as a big brother." "Really? Really? Who else will teach them about ducks and horses and all the important things?" He brightened. "I could teach them to ride. Pa says I'm the best young rider in the county." "That you are." She ruffled his hair. "Now go wash up. Your father will be home soon." As Jamie ran inside, Evelyn remained on the steps, watching the road. Eli had gone to town for supplies and to meet with the banker about expanding their horse breeding operation. What had started as a dream was becoming reality. 3 mares were due to foal this spring, and buyers were already expressing interest. A dust cloud on the road announced his return, but as the wagon drew closer, she saw he wasn't alone. Dr. Harrison sat beside him, medical bag at his feet. Fear shot through her. "Is something wrong?" "Just a precaution," Eli said, helping the doctor down. "Saw him in town and thought it might be wise to have him check on you." But she knew him too well. The tension in his shoulders, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Something had happened. "Doctor." Harrison examined her thoroughly, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. "Any day now," he confirmed. "Keep someone close." After he left, Evelyn cornered her husband in the kitchen. "What really happened in town?" Eli sighed, sinking into a chair. "There was a letter from your father." The blood drained from her face. How did he find me? News of the trouble with Hartley. I suspect legal documents, public records. He pulled out a crumpled envelope. I wasn't going to show you, didn't want to upset you, but with trembling hands, she opened the letter. Her father's scrawl was barely legible, but the message was clear. He knew where she was. He wanted money. If she didn't send it, he'd come himself and tell everyone what kind of daughter she really was. Worthless, ungrateful. The reason her mother died. He's lying, Eli said firmly. You know that. I know. She dropped the letter on the table. But will others? We've worked so hard to build a life here, to earn respect. If he shows up, drunk and raging, then we'll deal with it. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly. Haven't we faced worse? The whole town against us, legal troubles, near loss of our child? Your father is just a bitter old man with no power over us. She wanted to believe him, but that night the pain started, and all thoughts of her father fled. It was a long labor. Through the night and into the next day, Evelyn struggled to bring their child into the world. Mrs. Crawford came to help, along with Mrs. Morrison and, surprisingly, Mrs. Harrison, despite her poor sight. I've delivered dozens of babies, she said calmly. My hands remember what my eyes can't see. Eli refused to follow tradition and wait outside. He stayed by Evelyn's side, letting her grip his hand through the worst of it, murmuring encouragement when she wanted to give up. You're the strongest woman I know, he said as another contraction peaked. You can do this. I'm tired, she gasped. So tired. I know, but think of Jamie, waiting to meet his brother or sister. Think of our life together, all of us. As dawn broke on the second day, a new cry joined the world. A daughter, small but perfect, with her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair. She's beautiful, Mrs. Crawford pronounced, cleaning the baby and wrapping her in soft blankets. What will you call her? Evelyn looked at Eli, who was staring at his daughter with wonder. Margaret, she said softly, for her father's first love, and hope, for what she represents. Margaret Hope Warden. Eli's eyes filled with tears. He kissed Evelyn's forehead, then their daughter's. Perfect, he whispered. Jamie was allowed in once mother and baby were settled. He approached cautiously, as if they might break. She's so small, he breathed. Was I ever that small? Even smaller, Evelyn assured him. But you grew strong, just like she will. Can I hold her? With careful instruction, Jamie held his sister, his face glowing with pride and responsibility. Hi, Maggie, he whispered. I'm your big brother. I'll teach you everything. The weeks that followed were a blur of feedings and diapers, exhaustion and joy. The community, now mostly accepting of the wardens, sent gifts, blankets, preserves, offers of help. Even Mavis Thornton sent a beautifully embroidered baby gown, though she didn't visit personally. It was during this peaceful time that he arrived. Evelyn was nursing Maggie on the porch, enjoying the spring sunshine, when a figure appeared on the road, even from a distance. She recognized the shambling gait, the aggressive set of shoulders. Her father had found her. Eli, she called softly, not wanting to alarm Jamie, who was playing nearby. Her husband emerged from the barn, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze. His expression hardened. Take the children inside, he said quietly. Lock the door. Eli, please, Evelyn, trust me. She gathered Maggie and called Jamie, ushering them into the house, but she couldn't help watching from the window as her father approached. Patrick Moore looked older, more weathered, but the mean glint in his eyes remained. He stopped at the gate, swaying slightly. Heard my daughter was living high out here, he called. Married herself a rancher, had herself some brats. State your business and leave, Eli said coldly. My business? My business is with my ungrateful daughter, the one who left me to rot while she played lady of the manor. He spat in the dirt. I'm her father. She owes me. She owes you nothing. That's so. Maybe folks around here would like to know what kind of woman you married. How she killed her own mother, letting her bleed out while she cowered in a corner. How she's cold as ice, probably poisoned that man in Ohio just like they said. Eveline pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming. The old lies, the twisted version of her mother's death that her father had created to ease his own guilt. "You're drunk," Eli said with disgust. "And you're a liar. Get off my land. Not without what's mine. That girl owes me for 18 years of feeding and housing her worthless hide. The only thing worthless here is you." Eli's voice was deadly quiet. "A man who beat his wife to death, then blamed his child, who drove his daughter to flee across the country to escape his cruelty." "She tell you that? The lying?" "The doctor told me. Harrison wired back to Ohio, talked to the physician who treated your wife. He remembered you, more, remembered the bruises, the broken bones, remembered a 12-year-old girl trying to stop the bleeding while you ran off to drink away your guilt." Patrick's face went purple. "You can't prove nothing." "I don't need to. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll help you along. I'll go to the sheriff. Tell everyone what she is." "Go ahead. Sheriff Dalton already knows all about you. Seems you're wanted back in Ohio for theft and assault." "He'd be happy to arrange transport." That penetrated Patrick's drunken bravado. He stumbled back a step. "This ain't over," he snarled. "That girl, that woman is my wife, the mother of my children. And if you come near any of them again, they'll never find your body." Eli's hand rested on his rifle. The Wyoming wilderness is unforgiving to men who threaten families. Accidents happen all the time. Patrick Moore stood there for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he turned and stumbled back the way he'd come, muttering curses. Eli waited until he was out of sight before returning to the house. He found Eveline on the floor, sobbing, Jamie trying to comfort her while Maggie fussed in her basket. "Ma's sad," Jamie said, looking scared. "Was that bad man her PA?" He was. Eli knelt beside them, gathering his family close. "But he's gone now. He won't hurt anyone again." "How do you know?" Eveline asked through her tears. "Because Sam Crawford and Tom Morrison followed him to town. Made sure he got on the eastbound stage. Made it clear what would happen if he returned. The sheriff was happy to encourage his departure. Seems your father made threats against several people in town, including Mrs. Thornton. Even she agreed he needed to go." Eveline laughed through her tears at the irony. "Mavis Thornton defended me?" "In her way. Said you might be many things, but you weren't responsible for your father's sins." That night, after the children were asleep, Eli and Eveline sat by the fire. She'd been quiet since her father's departure, lost in thought. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said finally. "Sorry, our children." "Stop." He turned her face to his. "You have nothing to apologize for. That man's poison ends with him. Our children will know only love." "He said I killed her. My mother. Maybe if I'd been braver, fought him." "You were 12 years old. Eveline, a child. What happened to your mother was his doing, not yours. I know that here." She touched her head. "But here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "Then we'll keep reminding you until your heart believes it too." He kissed her gently. "You saved yourself. You survived. You built a new life, became a wonderful mother, a beloved wife. That's your triumph over him." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." He glanced toward the stairs. "All of you, my fierce, brave family." As spring turned to summer, life settled into peaceful rhythms. Jamie helped with the new foals, showing a natural gift with horses. Maggie grew round and happy, her laughter filling the house. The ranch prospered, their reputation as horse breeders growing. On a warm August afternoon, Eveline stood at the same clothesline where this year's journey had begun. Maggie played on a blanket nearby, grasping at butterflies. Jamie and Tom Morrison were racing their ponies in the near pasture, their shouts carrying on the wind. A wagon approached. Mrs. Harrison coming for her weekly visit. The elderly woman had become like a grandmother to the children, her gentle presence a blessing Evelyn hadn't expected. "How are you, dear?" Mrs. Harrison asked, settling on the porch with Maggie in her lap. "Happy," Evelyn said simply. "Truly, deeply happy. You've earned it. The road here wasn't easy. No, but it led me where I needed to be." She watched Eli emerge from the barn, tall and strong, raising a hand in greeting. "I came here to marry a stranger, hoping for a new life. Instead, I found a family, a community, a love I didn't know existed. Mercy's Bend needed you as much as you needed it." Mrs. Harrison said, "You showed us our own prejudices, made us better." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Warden family gathered on their porch. Eli whittled while Evelyn mended. Jamie read aloud from his primer, and Maggie babbled from her father's lap. "Pa," Jamie said suddenly, "I'm glad that mean man came to marry Miss Evelyn first, even if it was sad he died. Why's that, son? Because then she wouldn't be our ma, and Maggie wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be a real family." Evelyn met Eli's eyes over their children's heads, seeing her own wonder reflected there, from mail-order bride to mother, from outcast to accepted, from desperate hope to fulfilled promise. The journey had been nothing like she'd imagined and everything she'd needed. "You're right, Jamie," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything happened exactly as it should." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Evelyn Moore Warden closed her eyes and thanked whatever fate had brought her to that train platform on a snowy November day. She'd thought she was coming to marry Abel Jones. Instead, she'd found Eli Warden and discovered that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that take you by surprise. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the plains. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. And on a small ranch in Wyoming, a family born of chance and choice, heartbreak and healing, settled in for another peaceful night, complete in their love for each other and the life they'd built from the ashes of old dreams. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier love and redemption. Please leave a comment below sharing your location. Subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories. And let me know your thoughts about Evelyn and Eli's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? I'd love to hear from you.